Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Tank Talk podcast. You might be asking yourself, where is John Hudson? John Hudson is here. He's behind the scenes. He's doing all the stuff, but we have a wonderful guest for you today. And I've been so excited to get her on the Tank Talk podcast. We have Alex Rose, who is the associate editor of Amazonas and Coral. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad I remember that small piece of information. I just knew you as Alex, and we had met. What was the show that we met at? It was the little one. Do you remember?
Was it an AGA show? Yeah,
Yes.
It was maybe Aquatic Gardeners, I think. Yeah. Yep.
Yes. And you were part of the Amazonas crew over there, and you're super knowledgeable. And so I thought it'd be awesome to have you come on the podcast. And this is just going to be like an hour of Alex storytelling time for the most part, because what I'm impressed about is I see your pictures on like your posts on Facebook and Instagram. You're like all over the world. You're like a world traveler. And I envy that, because the only places I've been besides the United States is, I think I spent a day in Mexico one time, and you've been everywhere. And so I thought it would be really cool, as it pertains to the fish keeping hobby, if you could share with us some of your awesome discoveries over the last, how long have you been doing this? How long have you been associated with Amazonas and been world traveling?
Yeah, so I've been with Amazonas for about 4 years now. Coral I've been with for about 2. So Stefan Tanner, who is one of the publishers of Amazonas, he's been running that for quite a few years now. But we just acquired Coral, like 2 years ago when James Lawrence passed away. So now both of the magazines are under the same umbrella of our publishing company, which is Aquatic Media Press. So I get to cover a lot of cool stuff with them, which is fun. And then I do also work for another magazine too in Australia. It's called Ocean Geographic. It's an ocean conservation magazine. And I'm their science editor. So I get to write and do underwater photography. And that's where a lot of my travel stems from, because I've been with them for the last 12 years. So with them being Australia based, a lot of my travel since I've been working with them has been that direction in the world. So I've gotten to do a lot of cool travel in Asia and Australia and all the fun places with the cool critters that we love to keep. So yeah, I'm pretty lucky that way.
So what is your background? How did you get, obviously you've got some type of a background, because how did you get into all of this?
Yeah. So as I think most of our paths are kind of meandering and not very straight, I have been a fish nerd always. And I have the Shedd Aquarium to thank for that. So I grew up in Chicago. That's where I'm from. That's where I still live. And some of my earliest memories, like period, are from Shedd Aquarium. Like I remember looking through the tanks. And that absolutely got me hooked on fish really early. Of course, being somewhere where there's no ocean, it's a little bit hard to go see tropical fish anywhere other than in a store or in a tank. So I was lucky to have that influence growing up. But I started scuba diving when I was about 19 years old, and I couldn't believe that I'd waited that long to do it. And that kind of changed the whole trajectory of what I was doing. As soon as I actually got underwater and realized that this was kind of a valid option for life, I was like, okay, yeah, I need to do more of this. So started working for Rod's Food. A lot of people in the fresh or saltwater world know Rod's Food. It's a really premium frozen marine fish food. And I worked for Rod for 3 years and bred clownfish in the meantime. And my now boss at the Australia magazine met me while I was working there, and his favorite fish is clownfish, and asked me to write an article about clownfish. And that's how I got started at that magazine. And then it all kind of just trickled on from there into all this fun stuff that I get to do now. So
yeah. Did you at any point have like a formal education, or you were just like boots on the ground?
So it's a little bit of both. So I'm a biology background through and through. So I did my undergrad in biology and music. Actually, I play violin as well. That's one of my side gigs, is I still play violin. So yeah, I was biology and music, and then did a master's in aquatic biology at Western Illinois University here in Illinois. So yeah, that's my background. And then stumbled into the science writing thing, mainly just because I love science and I love writing. And I realized that, wow, a lot of people are not amazing at science communication. So I think I should do more of that. So yeah, it's what I really enjoy doing.
It's funny you mention that, because I too have a science background. I majored in biology, minored in chemistry, did a master's degree in biotechnology and chemical science, went on and did a master's cert in aquaculture and fish health. And one of the things when I'm a biology professor, and you're absolutely right, it is really hard for people to write in scientific terms, because what we do in the sciences is very different than what almost every other person does.
Mm-hmm.
in every other discipline. We try to take something that is really, really complicated
Yeah.
and make it easy for them to understand. A lot of other disciplines are like, oh, you know what? This actually isn't all that complicated, but let's spice it up and make it seem a lot worse than it really is. So
Right.
it takes a special talent to do what it is that you do. All right.
Yeah.
So you are one of the, I would say, few that are lucky enough to take that aquatics education and then
Mhm.
transfer into the real world and do something really special.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that just have really impressed you, especially as it pertains to freshwater, but it doesn't have to be exclusively freshwater?
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
what are some of the places you've been where you're just like, wow, this needs people need to know this?
So the fun part about spending time underwater, I think, is the more you see, the more you realize that every place is kind of like that. It's just if you choose to look hard enough. So during COVID, actually, it kind of prompted me to do a lot more freshwater exploration stuff because, like I said, with the magazine in Australia, I traveled a ton internationally, and that kind of went away for a few years, and it was just too hard. I mean, like, you could leave, but I mean, if you got sick while you were abroad, it was just a total mess. And I was like, I don't really want to risk that, and it's too expensive and too much time. So I was like, I really need to focus more closer to home. And that really, really got me kind of tuned into more freshwater storytelling. And I don't know why it took me so long because I've kept freshwater tanks since I was a kid. Like, I've had aquariums since I was 5 years old and have, kept the gamut of anything my parents would let me have, all the way up until now, whatever I can manage to take care of while I'm gone. But never really did a lot of freshwater outside exploration. And I got really hooked on freshwater river snorkeling.
Mm.
So I've spent some time doing some work with gobies in Hawaii, which was kind of an unexpected thing. So let's see, what was this about? It was 2022, I think, at some point, or 21. I got hired to do a film gig in Hawaii for a friend for some saltwater stuff, ocean things. And about 2 weeks before I got there, it occurred to me that I knew absolutely nothing about the freshwater fish of Hawaii. And I was like, what do they even have? I don't even know. It's just not something that comes up. Hawaii is known for all these really classic marine aquarium fish, and we just don't even think about the fresh stuff. So I thought, all right, I need to do a little bit of looking around, and found not a ton of literature, but I mean, the pieces that were out there were definitely conclusive. And I was like, okay, so there's hardly anything. Basically, Hawaii has 5 endemic species, like native species of freshwater fish, and they're all gobies. That's it. And I was like, huh, okay, well, maybe this won't be impossible to find. So I found a paper that was talking about all the sampling that they've done to go check out the gobies of Hawaii. And they didn't give you exact locations because I think they don't want people showing up and collecting, which makes sense. But they had this nice little map of the Hawaiian Islands that just had little dots all over it where they went collecting. And I was like, I can do some sleuthing. I can figure this out. So I like overlaid an actual map of Hawaii and was like, oh, these are all waterfalls that I can drive to. Amazing. So like on the few days that I had time, like spare time where I wasn't spoken for underwater stuff in the sea, got in the car, drove across, and went and did some waterfall hiking. Wound up finding a couple cool spots, and I found 3 of the goby species that are out there. The fun part about them is that all of them have these really crazy life cycles. They're waterfall climbers, almost all of them. So the 4 actual endemics there are waterfall climbing gobies, which is so weird when you think about a fish that's like this size climbing a 400-foot waterfall. And I mean, we're not talking like little, oh, look, it managed to get up a stream. No, like a sheer cliff face with water pounding down off the side of it. And it's just completely insane that they can even do that. Like, that just blew me away that there was even an option. So found a couple of the species that were the more we're going to call them the lazy ones. They're slightly bigger fish and they don't really have the same face and pectoral fin structure to get them up the super tall waterfalls. But I still would really like to go back and find the other 2 that are the tall waterfall climbers, and in the process of this whole thing learned some really interesting things about like their diet and the differences between the ones that don't climb so high and the ones that do. So it turns out that the ones that climb really far are almost entirely herbivorous, which when you think about it, you're like, well, wouldn't they need more protein or like more calories in their diet to get them up the waterfall? And the thing is that they spend so much time climbing the waterfall that they have to be able to eat along the way. So with ones that eat like bio cover and little bits of algae, this is all stuff that's growing along the edges of the waterfalls anyway, so they can actually eat as they're going up the waterfall, which is kind of a crazy idea to be like, you're getting pounded in the face with a torrent of water and you're stopping for snacks along the way. But just like it's a really cool fish. So yeah, there's a bicolor goby that's the males when they're in breeding color are like really pretty, like kind of velvety black and bright orange, and they're just split right down the middle. Really pretty colors, and some nice looking fish. But as is the case with a lot of freshwater fish, they're the most impressive during their breeding season. So, if you see them outside of breeding season, people are like, oh, great, another little brown fish. Like, you watch your mouth.
So right now, I am learning so much from you. I don't think you realize how much I'm learning from this conversation. So I have in a 75-gallon right over here, I have the threadfin goby.
Oh yeah.
Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this fish, but I imported a mess load of them. I had like 70 of them. And as imports come in, they come in a big bag. And I went to go dump them out of the bag into a net, and the water falls through a bucket. Every single one of them was sticking to the bag. So I'm pulling these fish out, and now they're sticking to my fingers. They're sticking to my hand. They were the stickiest fish I have ever experienced in my life. And I'm like going like this with my hand. I'm trying to get them out. I'm like trying to get them out into the water.
Yeah.
They stuck to everything. Now, the other interesting thing about this fish that I had never had them before, they eat algae. And I was like, these things are like algae eaters, and you're blowing my mind. I don't think they're from Hawaii, but I'm starting to realize, oh my gosh, what you're describing are these fish, and it's the reason why they're so sticky. It's the reason why their mouths are pointed downwards like other gobies are not. So
exactly.
Holy cow, that is absolutely so cool.
Yeah, it's fun. That's the cool thing about like getting to go out in the field is that, we see all these fish in our aquariums, and you kind of look at them and you think, well, I don't know, what kind of tank do they need? Well, if you get to see them in the wild and see their habitat and see where they live and see what they eat, you're like, oh, I know exactly what kind of habitat I have to build for them, because it's insane to think that a fish that's so small would need so much current. You look at it and you're like, it's this tiny fish. It'll be fine with just a little bit of flow. And it's like, no, it needs to be like pounded in the face with current all the time. Like that's what makes them happy. And it's nuts. And yeah, it's just cool stuff that you learn when you go out there and see them in the wild. So yeah, it's fun.
So these again, I hadn't really ever contemplated. I thought about it a few times. Like, there's got to be freshwater fish in Hawaii. In fact, we're thinking about possibly going there next year. And that was one of the first thoughts in my mind. I'm like, I would really like to go there and see if, there's got to be fresh water existing on these islands. Where are the fish? And so the gobies are amazing. Are they at all in the aquarium trade?
Not really. Not these species. There are, two that are actually endemic that only live on the Hawaiian Islands I've never seen in the trade, and I honestly don't know what the regulations are around collecting them. The other ones, though, are just native, and you can find them around other Pacific islands. So the cool thing about these gobies is that, they're freshwater, but they're actually amphigerous. So as when they lay their eggs and their larvae hatch, they get flushed completely out right into the sea. And then as they get big enough, they sort of make their way up. So similar to like a salmon or something like that, but they don't choose to go back out to the sea. They're forced back out to the sea because they're too small to do anything else other than be carried by the current. But they basically become part of the marine plankton for a little while until they're big enough, and then migrate back up into their stream. So during this period of their life cycle, where they're out in the ocean, they get distributed all around the sea, anywhere that they can actually get to through the currents, which is why some of these species are just native to the whole area instead of just to Hawaii. So you'd probably have more luck collecting those just because they're not endemic. So you could find them other places and be like, well, they're just a native fish. So probably those, which would be two of the species that I found. Pretty cool looking though, and I would imagine they'd be not hard to keep in captivity, but I would imagine they'd be a real tricky one to breed in captivity, because you're running into the same problem like a mono shrimp. It took so long to figure out, what do we need to do to breed them? Well, they need a saltwater phase, and that is not easy to manage in captivity. Not impossible, but definitely a struggle. So yeah.
Would that also mean, and I think you kind of mentioned this, but just to be clear, it's not like breeding other fish where freshwater fish, you've got a fish, it spawns, you got eggs hatch, you've got fish.
Right.
With the gobies, it sounds like there's a larval, like a saltwater larval form that is
There
very,
is.
very unlike the freshwater final
Yeah.
form that they take.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I'd love to know what they actually look like at that stage because as far as I know, nobody knows. I mean, they're just this random little fish that nobody's really that concerned with. I mean, the bigger species, people eat them in Hawaii, like natives eat them. They're just like, yeah, well, and they use them for bait for other fish. They're not really thought of as anything particularly special. But I'd love to know more about them. I mean, these fish that live sort of at the border of fresh and salt waters are just fascinating. And it's amazing that their biology allows them to, when they're a tiny larva, get flushed out from freshwater to saltwater and survive that. And not only survive, but thrive and then come back to fresh. Like, that's a that's a pretty nutty biology. So
It's a
that's cool. I'd like to know more
Herculean.
about
Yeah. I mean,
that.
it's a Herculean thing when you look at the biochemistry of these fish that can do that. And another good example would be like the bitterlings. People always ask, because
Oh,
I bring in the volcano bitterlings all the time. They're
yeah,
gorgeous fish. I've had the white fins. Can you breed them?
cool.
Good luck. No,
Yeah,
because
I guess
same
someone can, but
situation. They're going to need live clams and then
yeah,
live oysters. Sorry, and then they've got that saltwater form. You're
yeah,
not breeding these things. You're not breeding them in captivity. It's not worth it. I mean, it would be worth it in terms of just an intellectual thing, but if you're trying to breed them at scale, forget it. You're just
no,
better off managing the wildlife in their ecosystem. Don't overfish it and
yeah,
take too many, and that's just the way it's going to have to go.
exactly. Yeah, it's so interesting though. There's just so much we can always learn from these fish, and they're just fascinating.
Did you do any like water chemistry testing while you were in Hawaii in terms of the fresh water, what like the hardness, pH? Do you
No.
have any idea? I'm
Well,
curious
I
what
was
these gobies
I
are
was
eating.
totally unequipped to do this because mainly I just didn't know what I was gonna find,
Yeah,
and I had so many other responsibilities while I was there that I was just like, "Okay, you just have to go, like, just go,
yeah,
and make sure you see them and try to find them." I mean, my first videos of them were just my phone. Like, I swear I'm on a quest to constantly drown my phone. Like, every time I have a chance to just shove it in the water, people are like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "They're fine, it's waterproof, it'll be good." So, yeah, I mean, found them just, like, in 4 or 5 inches of water, just like right at the edge of the sea, like coming in. And I was like, what?
wow,
So then luckily, I mean, I was there to do videography stuff for my ocean things. So I mean, I had my camera with me, but
yeah,
I hadn't planned to do any hard science of any kind. That said, I would love to go back. I mean, these are not hard places to get to. I mean, Hawaii is just littered with waterfalls. And
yeah.
so these fish are everywhere, and all you really need is time, and the will to climb up a waterfall with a camera, so that's fine.
And what's cool is there could be an opportunity for you to discover your own fish, and you could have
Really.
like Gobius rosea or something like that. Like, wow, this is awesome! I've got a fish named after me, and it's a goby, and it's got like a weird sort of face to it, a crooked mouth, and you're
Right,
like,
I
yeah,
would love
that's the one. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I had a blast finding out about him. So yeah, and
Yeah.
well, it kind of really just got me into thinking more about gobies in general. So like, I'm gonna be in Japan in August for a dive trip. So it's mostly ocean stuff. But now because of my newfound obsession with freshwater ecosystems, there are two things I also want to try to do while I'm there. So Japan has the world's largest salamanders. So it's yeah, giant salamander lives there, and they
Uh-huh.
can be like 4 feet long. So this is an almost person-sized salamander. So I need to go see this. And
Yeah.
also there are a load of these types of gobies over there too. These like high flow, cool water, highly oxygenated water type species that just do the same thing, where they've got the real sticky pectoral fins. It's basically just a big suction cup that right
Mhm.
onto the rock, big lips for scraping up bio cover, and some really colorful ones. I have to look and see what species they have, but I think they at least look like the Sikiopterus and all those that are same as like the thread fins all around Asia and Southeast Asia. They tend to have really similar ones, and it's because a lot of them have these amphidromous life cycles where the larvae get tossed out into the sea and then they come back, but they don't always come back to the same waterway.
Yeah.
But you never know. That's how they get distributed around the Pacific. So yeah, I would really like to go try to see some of the native freshwater gobies while I'm there, and just see what they've got. I mean, I just haven't seen much about them, so would be
Well, I'll
nice.
tell you, if you love gobies, and we're not far from one another. We're probably amazing, like what, 40 minutes away from one another. Right now,
Mhm.
in the fish room, I have quarantining two Rhinogobius species, Rhinogobius hensionensis, I've got
Oh,
the red spot goby. I've got the flaming arrow goby right now in quarantine. I have the
oh,
yellow stripes that I've had in quarantine. They've been with me now for probably 6 months. So I too love the goby. And I've got, like I said, I got the thread fins and the 75 over
yeah.
here. I love, 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 love gobies.
Oh
They're
man,
awesome.
I am gonna have to come see them. That sounds
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I don't know what it is about gobies. They're like the right combination of being really charismatic, like they're cute, so they're
Mhm.
very easy to look at, but then their behaviors are so funny, and the
Yeah.
way they're always sitting up on their little fins, they look so intuitive, and it's like, oh, I don't know, I love them, love gobies.
They get
So
into
yeah.
fights. They open their mouth towards the other
Oh
males. Like, what? You want to
yes,
go? You want to go? You want to go? Yeah.
yes,
All right. Never mind. We're good. You
right.
know?
Just kidding, but I am prettier. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. And there's nothing more entertaining than you clean
appropriate.
a tank, you get they all pile up on one another. It's like the minute you put a gravel vat in the aquarium, you've literally got a pile of gobies just sitting there on a rock or by a cave. You're like, man, we're gonna just cuddle up here until this big plastic thing goes away, and then we'll go back to showing off and being angry at one another, but not
Right, they're
actually
all
doing anything happy.
besties.
Yeah. Hmm.
That's really funny. I love
Oh,
it.
that's
Yeah,
awesome.
I'm gonna need to come see these guys. I should bring the camera over and try to do some like macro video of some of these guys. That would be really fun.
Yep.
Mhm.
And if you want
Mm.
some for your own aquariums, like I said, we have some, so you could have gobies of your own. How about that?
Well, okay, if you twist my arm.
I mean, I've only got like I think right now I've got maybe 80 of the Chinensis, and then
Yeah.
I don't know 30 or 40 flaming arrows. And the red
Wow.
spots did really horrible for me this time. I had
Huh.
75. I don't know what happened. I put them in a 20-gallon, and normally they do just fine. And I literally lost like probably 70% of them within 2 days. And I was like, oh, that hurts so
Oh,
bad.
man.
So normally, with our Chicago water, they're like, cool, we're good.
Yeah,
But
I would think they'd be fine. Oh,
yeah,
that's too bad.
yeah.
Mm,
But
damn.
I usually try to get them in like every other time that I do imports. I'll get
Yeah.
a big group because they do well. They really do. They are a
Cool.
pretty resilient fish as long as you give them the flow and
Exactly.
they're eating right away. You're in good shape. So what else? What else have you seen that
Yeah.
is like it's awesomeness?
So, I'm working on a hopefully grant funded project. We'll know in a few months. So again, over the last few years, doing a lot of stuff more locally, I kind of got sucked into this whole river system in Oregon and California that I've just become totally obsessed with. So my favorite river over there. I know that's a silly thing to say, a favorite river. Who really has a favorite river? But um, I love the Smith River. So the Smith River has become one of my favorites. It flows from Oregon into California and empties out in Smith River, California, right into the Pacific. And it's a really fascinating river, mainly because it's one of the only rivers on the entire West Coast that has never been dammed.
Wow.
So lots of rivers have been dammed, dams have been removed, dams are still there, whatever. Like they've been altered. The flow of the rivers have been altered in a lot of different ways to accommodate human activities. But the Smith River has remained relatively unchanged from how we know it to be. So it's cool to have a river system like that so that when you're looking at others that are being rehabilitated after dams have been removed or other damage has been done and they're trying to fix them, to have a river system to look back on that hasn't had any of those things happen to it. It's the most complete view of a river watershed that you can get, which is really useful. So I have been snorkeling pieces of the Smith River and diving it for the last 4 years and have found some really cool stuff along the way. So my most exciting find. So one of my friends there is a fisheries biologist, and I wasn't really planning on being there at the time of year that I was. And she called me and was like, "Hey, I heard that there might be sturgeon in the Smith." I was
Uh,
like a sturgeon, and she was like, "No, no, like a group of sturgeon." I was like, uh, okay, let me get a flight. So, got my butt out there quickly because you never know. I mean, you see these
mhm.
wild fish phenomena, they could just be gone overnight. And it was middle of the summer. And I was like, okay, well, this is definitely one of those rivers that fluctuates a ton. I mean, from its high water point, like January to end of summer, I mean, it can completely dry up in certain areas. So like you need to get there when you have time and when you can. So got out there. When we got there, realized that there was no easy way to get up the river to the point where people had seen them because it was like too heavy flow this direction. So unless you were taking a boat, but it's really narrow in that section. So it was like, well, we can't really motor up there. And I had all my dive gear, all my camera gear. We couldn't paddle up there. Like you could paddle against it by yourself, but not with all your stuff. So the solution we settled on was rappelling off a 70-foot cliff ahead of the spot and then floating downriver into the sturgeon. So if anyone saw us, I'm sure we looked certifiably insane because there were 4 of us with all of our, luckily had our friend with us who was a really good rock climber, so we were not too worried about like dying on the cliff. But still, like, that's not what I do. Like, I'm not a rock climber. I'm a much more of a klutz and I slip on things. So I was like, all right, well, somebody will figure this out. So we got down, lowered all of our dive gear, all of our camera stuff down, got ready on this big flat rock, and just drifted down river for maybe 2-3 minutes. It just empties out into this big 30-foot deep pool full of sturgeon. And I was like, oh my God. So there were probably 30 or 40 big, like, adult spawning green sturgeon in this pool. And normally when you see sturgeon, you're familiar with seeing them in like the Columbia or the Snake River or something, and the visibility is like right here. So when you see the fish, it's on top of your face and you're like, there's a fish. But like, this was beautiful visibility. I mean, it was like 63-degree water, probably 50-foot viz. I mean, like, you could just see everything, and beautiful. And the Smith River is known for having this like gorgeous kind of emerald green water. And it was just so pretty. And I was so amazed. And the fish were so big. These are like 6-7 foot long dinosaur fish. I mean, sturgeon in the fossil record are pretty much unchanged from what they are right now. So to see this like dinosaur fish just in a river hole, just normal, was the coolest thing. Like, one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So got some really good footage of them. The other critter that I've kind of become obsessed with over there are the newts. So it's not an uncommon species, but the whole West Coast has rough-skinned newts all the way up and down, pretty much from LA all the way up to like Vancouver, BC. There are rough-skinned newts. So it's not like an uncommon species, but there's still so much that we don't know about them. And the things that get focused on for them is that they're really toxic. So it's a very toxic species. And they've done a lot of studies about this sort of toxicity arms race between them and the things that eat them, because one of the only things that can eat a rough-skinned newt is a garter snake. So, and only those garter snakes, not just like any garter snake. If you grabbed one from here and tried to feed it a newt, it would die for sure. But like, they've co-evolved for so many years that it's this back and forth of like snakes that are more likely to be able to not die from eating a newt. So then the newts get more toxic, and it's just like this back and forth constantly. So it makes for a really cool story. And they also, kind of like gobies, also tend to be very charismatic. So like, they like these really kind of nice, shallow little offshoots of the waterways where they all come to breed. And they're just great for photography. And they don't, once they're breeding, they pay absolutely no attention to you. So it's really conducive to good photography. Like, you can get up like 2 inches from their faces and they just sit there like, okay. Which is awesome. So I've got this whole project that I want to do. I just applied for a grant for it, and I should know in a couple months if we get it, to snorkel the entire length of the Smith River. So instead of just doing parts of it, there's probably from before. So it's got 3 forks, and then they have a confluence in Gasky, California. And then you just keep going all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. That's about 25-mile stretch. So we'd want to snorkel the whole 25 miles of that stretch of the Smith. So
that is going to be awesome. You mentioned the newts. I had a pair of Spanish rib newts in the fish.
Oh, I love them.
They are, just like you said, they are goofy like gobies, and they got really used to me. And I actually had them, believe it or not, in a 125-gallon tank. And you think, wow, that's a lot of water.
Yeah.
And they were there for a long time, and they would eat, and those newts are pretty much 100% fully aquatic. I mean, they do breathe air, but they were awesome. Would love to get more of those. And then, so the other question I had is, you were talking about the sturgeon. Do you think there's a possibility that may wind up being classified as a different species compared to what we see in like the central part of the United States? Just because, gosh, that environment is so different, like what you're describing, that you'd almost think that they have developed other types of physiological conditions that would allow them to thrive in that environment.
I do wonder that. And I was not able to find any conclusive studies done that like employed genetic studies at all, where they were comparing like those sturgeon, especially those green sturgeon, to other green sturgeon of the region. But it's very possible. I mean, when you look at these habitats that are so severe and so different and so isolated from the other river systems, it's logical to think that if they spend enough years apart from other breeding populations, that they would start to diverge and have enough of a genetic barrier that they wouldn't interbreed anymore.
Mhm.
So I don't know. And I also don't know like what point we are at in that evolutionary divergence. Like we might be at the beginning of it from an evolutionary time scale. I have no idea. But it would be not illogical to think that they might be different than the other sturgeon in the region. Don't know, but it'd be a good PhD project for somebody.
It sure would be. It sure would
So
be.
whoever's out there.
So as you're talking about going through and doing that 25 miles, we know the
Yeah,
sturgeon are there. We've got the newts. What else
yeah.
is in that region of interest that you think might really bring like a wow factor there? What are you expecting to see?
A lot. So the thing that the region's most known for is all of its salmon. So salmon and cutthroat trout are a big thing in the region, just because they are so economically important for the whole Pacific Northwest. It's also a big sport fishing thing.
Mhm.
Also, most of these fish tend to be a really good indicator of the health of a river overall. They need clean, clear, fast moving water, and if it's not there, they're not there. So there are, I'd say the Smith River ecosystem is one of the most healthy on the West Coast. It still has some of its historic populations of salmon. Obviously, not anywhere near the numbers that they probably were 2, 3, 400 years ago, but you could say that for absolutely anywhere on the planet. I don't think there's a single fish run that's what it was at its peak. But that's not to say that there isn't a lot of improvement that can be made, especially when we look at rivers that are managed well compared to others in an area. So the salmon and the trout would definitely be other species to focus on. Another thing that I love looking at is the things that they eat. So like I'm constantly always going smaller. Like I see something, I'm like, that's cool, but what's it eating? And what's it eating? And I love kind of looking at the whole food chain and seeing what we've got. And that part of the river, especially the ones that are farther up north where it might be a different habitat, a lot of people fly fish. And of course, if you're fly fishing, it means that the fish have something good to eat there. And most of the time, this is heavily leaning on aquatic insects. So things like dragonflies, damselflies, Dobson flies, robber flies, any of the things that eventually metamorphose into a flying adult, almost all of them have an aquatic life stage. So it's so fun to go try to look for those, because when you look at what a dragonfly looks like when it lives underwater, it's just this insane predator with gills. And you're just like, how does this happen? And it's so amazing to watch. And like every time you flip over a rock, you never know what you're going to find. Like it's a total treasure hunt every time you go out, because you're always going to find something. And I really like looking at the aquatic insect populations there as well, especially because they're such a strong indicator of river health. So that's also going to be a big part of the story, kind of doing the super macro side of the river food chain. So yeah, it should be cool.
So you mentioned that the Smith River, that's Smith River, right,
Yeah, Smith.
is
Yeah,
your favorite, which
it is.
indicates you've probably seen and been in other rivers in the area.
Yeah, yeah.
So my question then is, have you seen any evidence of farm raised salmon, which are tend to be bulkier? They tend not to have the energy levels that the
Mhm.
wild type do. Have you seen any of those genetics and any of that phenotypic characteristics seeping into the natural populations, damaging the salmon populations? Because then they can't get upriver because they're too big and fat, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So, the good thing about this specific area is that there are not many fish farms in the area, because the biggest issue you tend to get, of course, is when you're raising, like pen raising
Mhm.
salmon out in the ocean ecosystem, they escape, they wind up going upriver and or competing with the wild populations, kind of diluting the genetics if they do manage to breed, but usually just out competing in another way. There are not a ton of fish farms out there, which is good. Now, that doesn't mean that places aren't stocking a lot of these species for recreational fishing, but it's not happening a lot in the rivers. That's more in the lakes. And there are a ton of high elevation lakes out there that are stocked on a regular basis with trout and salmon. Another region where you see this becoming, well, not becoming, it is an issue that's becoming less of an issue now that it's been addressed, is actually in Yellowstone. So one of the places that I've been diving that's kind of off the beaten track is Yellowstone Lake. So most people know Yellowstone National Park because it's the nation's first national park, the start of probably the best idea the U.S. government has ever had. So that's great. And it's an amazing place to visit, but you don't normally think about going to dive there. And Yellowstone Lake has been invaded since the 80s, I think mid 80s, by lake trout. So the native species there is the Yellowstone cutthroat trout. But whether it was intentional or accidental, honestly, we'll probably never know. A lot of the lakes in the region are stocked with lake trout. They're big, they're easy fishing. They don't move around nearly as much as cutthroat. Cutthroat employ, all these little river tributaries where you're going to be fly fishing for them instead of, like angling for them. So it's a little bit of a different thing. So a lot of these lakes are stocked with lake trout. Problem being, lake trout are huge compared to cutthroat, like multiple times larger, and they actually become a predator of the cutthroat. So it causes this whole trophic cascade where you're basically adding another layer to the food chain and it screws everything up below it. And the good thing, though, is that what happens is when you do surveys and you see that there's a problem and people actually listen to the science that's coming back, you can go, oh, hey, there's a solution to this. So the cool thing, too, is that Yellowstone sits on the border of 3 different states. And normally you don't see 3 states all get together and say, let's work together and make this work. It's usually everybody kind of fighting for whose money is going to be spent on this effort and blah, blah, blah. And then nothing ever winds up happening. And because of the status of Yellowstone and the fact that it's such an important piece of like our nation's natural heritage, that they did actually come together and make this work. So there's been a real strong effort to gill net fish out as many of the lake trout as possible. So the good thing about the fact that they have very different life cycles is that you can put a gill net in a lake for lake trout and catch them and never catch a cutthroat, because the cutthroats are so much smaller and they don't even inhabit the same part of the lake. They're in the tributaries, not in the main area. So then what they do is you take out all these lake trout. Luckily, they're good eating. And then once they're filleted, they take all of the carcasses and toss them back into the lake, which you'd think, oh God, well, that's not good. It's going to cause all this pollution. But that's precisely the point, is that they dump them on top of the spawning grounds of the lake trout. And this causes a big anoxic event because of all of the decaying of the carcasses. There's bacterial bloom that sucks all of the oxygen out of the water and kills all of their fry. So it's a good and simple way to control the lake trout population that they figured out over the last few years, and it works. I mean, they take out tens of thousands of fish every single year, and now the numbers are starting to decrease, which of course means that there are less fish to be caught, which is great. So now the next thing is making sure that the rivers themselves are healthy enough so that when you're bringing back the cutthroat trout, they have the habitat that they need in order to reproduce. So it's a multi-step process, but it's working, and it's like, this is good. This is encouraging. It's nice when things work.
So in your travels, especially in the United States, in the freshwater realm, have you seen or what area do you think is the biggest concern when it comes to invasive species, just things that are not supposed to be there? Have you seen anything that really stands out like, oh man, this is a mess?
Oh, Florida. Poor Florida.
Oh, Florida. That could be a song.
Florida.
Oh, Florida.
Like I have a love-hate relationship with the waterways of Florida. It's amazing to be able to go somewhere and see so many fish that don't belong here, but also it's really bad to be able to go somewhere and see so many fish that don't belong here. That said, so many of the species there that are invasive have been there for so many decades now that they've almost naturalized to the rivers and the water systems. Now, that's not to, minimize the impact that invasive species have on an area at all. But I mean, nature does have ways of rebalancing itself when it can. You're seeing the same thing when you look at lionfish, invasive lionfish all over the Caribbean. I mean, that's a Pacific species. Nothing in the Caribbean knows that it can even eat a lionfish, and lionfish produce a gigantic number of eggs. I mean, like, they don't even have a spawning season. They're these huge females that just spawn tens of thousands of eggs every week of the year, all year. It's like, that's a really bad fish to have as an invasive. Luckily, what I try to remind myself of is that humans are insanely good at wiping things out when we want to. So, if we really focus our efforts on getting rid of some of these, I think there's at least a shot at controlling the populations. I don't think they're ever going to go away. Like, I don't think there's any world in which we eradicate invasive lionfish in the Caribbean. I think we're far past that. But through, spearing efforts by local divers, putting them on menus everywhere, and then having fish finally start to understand that you can eat these things, have moray eels and sharks realize, oh, these are now part of our food chain. It's a long process, but it'll happen. And I think that's probably the same thing that's happened in a lot of places in Florida. Like I said, not to minimize the impact of invasives, but things do even out after a while. And this is always the important part that I like to stress about, like knowing what we had before it has changed. So it's this whole shifting baselines idea where, like, if you've never seen a place and you go see it for the first time, let's say last week, to you, it's always going to be great. And you're like, oh, this is the snapshot that I'm going to remember. And it's like, yeah, but that's not what it was. So it's really important that when we're looking at these places, we have historical reference to be like, none of this used to be here. None of these plants used to be here. This entire river system has been changed because of X, Y, and Z. And that's not to say that, we need to spend bazillions of dollars trying to put them back exactly as they are, because generally once you lose pieces of a puzzle, you're not putting it back together. But we can at least take steps to not make the same mistakes in the future, and to do what we can to support the native species that do still live in those waters. So yeah, I mean, that's the case everywhere. I mean, the American Southeast is overall a case of that. I mean, it's the greatest amount of fish, freshwater fish diversity, I think, actually in the world, with like almost 500 species of freshwater fish in the Southeast. And I mean, tons of different mussels, tons of different crayfish. Like, it's an incredible amount of biodiversity, but it's also some of the most imperiled waterways and the most endangered species anywhere in the United States. So it's just places that we need to pay attention to. Conservation Fisheries over in Tennessee does some amazing work with breeding a bunch of different species like mad toms and darters, and like the fungulopant, like some of the Achilles in the area, the Barron's top minnow or whatever, and releasing them back into their streams and rivers, but then also coordinating that with efforts to keep those same streams and rivers clean. Because if animals don't have habitat to go back to, their only hope of survival is in your tank. Yeah, and, this is one of the things that I wish people who are detractors of the aquarium hobby in general paid a little bit more attention to, is that this isn't just going to Petco or Petland and buying whatever fish you can for as cheap as you can and treating it like a disposable thing. It isn't. And I mean, I'm not trying to sugarcoat and say that people don't do that. There are bad players in every industry, and we tend to focus on them. But the success stories that have come from hobbyists and institutions partnered with them, saving so many species from extinction, both fresh and saltwater. And it's particularly the case in freshwater. And we just don't pay attention to it. Like, our freshwater ecosystems of the world are the most endangered of anything, more than most rainforests. And we just don't even realize that they're there. And part of it is just being underwater. Like, how many of us really put a mask on and a snorkel and stick our faces into a river? Not a lot. I didn't even do that until 5 or 6 years ago. And I'm a fish nerd. So it's like, I think if more of us got out there and just saw what we had, it's like, you want to see what you still have, but also what you stand to lose if you don't protect these places. And we can't know if we're not out there. So that's why I have such a focus now on freshwater storytelling, because it's all these little species that nobody pays attention to until they're threatened or gone. And we should pay attention to them before we get to that point.
Yeah, we had, I think, Rick Borstein, he was a member of the GCA, he moved out to Florida, but he's always been really big in the CARES, the CARES programs, which is basically hobbyists bringing in these endangered species, caring for them, breeding them. But he did a lot of work with the Godeids that are in Mexico.
Of course,
oh my goodness. I don't know if you've ever been in any of those environments before, but they are so unique. These mountainous regions where the temperatures are getting down in the 40s and 50s, and these fish are thriving. Almost all of them are ready to go extinct. And he talked about how some of these conservation groups have actually been able to reintroduce some of the Godeids into some of these areas, and they've been fairly successful. So it can happen.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. We did a story about one of them, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And it was the Mexican split fin, one of the Godeids over there. And it had been extirpated from its local rivers for I think about 10 years, and it had been kept alive completely by aquarium populations of people in like Good Deed Working Group and like just around the world that have been like, we're saving the species. And in the meantime, they'd partnered this with an effort to clean up the waterways. And then they picked a day, which I thought was so perfect. And then on Day of the Dead, they decided to re-release this fish. And it was like bringing this fish back from the dead, basically, because it's like if people hadn't kept that species in captivity during that stretch of time where the river system was not healthy enough to maintain them, they'd be gone. We would have lost another species. And it's like to just take a broad brush across the aquarium trade and be like, not that important, just people with these little pets. And you're like, it's not a pet hobby. It's a lot more than that. I mean, yes, it's part of the pet trade, but that's not what keeping aquariums is about. I mean, yes, they can be beautiful, and yes, they can be a really fun, eye-catching piece in a home, but they're part of nature. And I mean, they're keeping nature in our homes so that the people who see them are inspired by them and want to learn more about them and want to protect the natural resources out there that these species come from. And, unless we've got people at home taking those initiatives into their own hands, their own tanks, their own basements, we won't have these animals. And it's an important thing to not forget about, which is why I'm always pushing hard to tell those stories in the Amazonas. And we do that on a regular basis, try to highlight all the good things that come from this hobby and the science that comes from rearing fish in captivity and the things that we learn and how those translate into protecting the wild ones in their natural habitats.
Yeah, I mean, people have to have an emotional connection to something in order to care about it, and that's part of what the aquarium hobby does. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit because you mentioned something a little while ago that I think is super important, and I think you're probably have seen this up close and personal. You talked about anoxic conditions, and one of the things we talk about in my microbiology class are the dead zones, right? The dead zones in the Gulf and along the East Coast, and certainly parts of Africa and Asia. And what generally happens for people who are watching this is you get a lot of farmers putting fertilizers in soils. Those fertilizers run off into the freshwater streams, eventually into major riverways. That eventually dumps out into the ocean, where typically what's keeping microbes at bay is the fact they've got plenty of sun, they've got plenty of space, they've got constant temperature. But the one thing they don't have is unlimited food. And once you give them that unlimited food, they're like, it's a party. And they start to grow and proliferate. And then you've got these organisms, microbes that are kind of like us. They like to eat these phototrophs, the photosynthetic organisms, and they're consuming oxygen. You get a depletion, and you wind up with these things called dead zones. Now, my question to you after that explanation is, have you seen them? What does it look like? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better?
Well, globally, our problem with dead zones is definitely growing. Anywhere that you've got a lot of agriculture that's relatively unregulated, you will have a problem. Like that's just across the board. Like if you put a human population that breeds a lot of animals or grows a lot of things that are going to require chemicals, they are going to wind up in your waterways. Like there's no way around it unless you're really careful about mitigation, which is generally not the case. So we always tend to have this not at all proactive approach to pollution where we wait until something is so bad that it can't be ignored. And we're like, oh, shoot, I guess we should maybe do something about that. It's like, yes, but this is such a consistent narrative. It's not like this is a new phenomenon. Like we've known about dead zones for decades. They've been getting worse also for decades. So every time another one pops up or one gets worse and we're surprised, I always wonder why. I'm like, we need to be proactive about how we manage our resources. So for me, it's a close to home issue. I mean, the Great Lakes very frequently have toxic algal blooms. And this is almost entirely from runoff from fertilizers and pesticides, primarily fertilizers from farming. Now, a lot of that is just because we don't always have very efficient ways of applying those fertilizers to fields. It tends to be this kind of spray and pray method where it's just everywhere on everything. And it's like, well, obviously none of that is going to get used. Sometimes upwards of 60% of the fertilizer that we put on fields winds up in waterways. Now that doesn't seem like a very efficient or economic use of our resources. Now, some people do a great job at managing this, others do not. Generally, the bigger an organization or the bigger like an agro-industrial area, the less it tends to pay attention to guidelines, which of course makes sense. The bigger something is and the more money it has, the more likely it is to not follow regulations because it can pay its way out of them. Again, not a new idea. But this does have a major effect on people, pets, wildlife, everything. So, like when you look at Lake Erie, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, pretty much every year we wind up with beach closures. And this is almost always after we have a rainwater event where we get a lot of water. And maybe it's a big rainstorm and we just don't have the mitigation systems in our cities built in that can manage that. So you get these overflows, they get dumped out into the lakes. You get these huge blooms because of all of the excessive amounts of nutrients. And then you can't go in the water. And that can be something as small as like, oh, it looks ugly. And, well, in cities, the case is usually because it's come from a sewer. So you're dealing with like, E. coli, like fecal coliform bacteria and things where you can get quite sick if you were to ingest them. But then others are more like the red tide phenomenon that you get on the coasts. So I was in California a year and some change ago, and I think it was Hurricane Hillary blew through while I was there, and it was a midsummer, like a midsummer massive tropical storm, and it was like, what? It wound up being like a category 4, just out of nowhere. It was really unexpected. It just developed into something really huge, got tons of rain. And that rain just washed so many nutrients out into the sea that within 2 days, they basically said no one should be in the water for at least several days after the hurricane calms down because it's going to be all of this inundation from sewer water basically and the runoff from agriculture, and you could see it. I mean, like when we did finally decide to go back in the water, because I was shooting a film there at the time, so had a little bit of a different view on it.
Yeah.
But you could see it. And I mean, like when we went out, because the one day it was just so icky in the bay that it was like, well, we don't want to be in the water here. I mean, you can get sick from that. We took a boat out past that and you could see the line. Like it looked like you drew a big line in the ocean that was like murky, red, nasty, stinky water. And then it just hits right up with fresh ocean water. And it's like the contrast is so huge. But when you think of animals stuck in that, I mean, they're these huge swaths of water that, yeah, I guess you can swim out of it if you can get far enough away. But for all those little coastal species that is their habitat, they don't have a choice. I mean, like pelagic stuff can go out farther into the ocean, but benthic critters and anything that lives coastal, it doesn't have a choice. So it's just stuck. And, then you very easily see the impact of that once it clears. Lots of dead stuff washes up. There was a huge die off this year in Monterey Bay, maybe 4 months ago, where they had a big rain event, same thing, everything washed out, huge toxic algal bloom, and just, I don't remember how many tons, but there were several tons of herring that were in the bay just dead. And you could see them just piles and piles of them just flopping around dying. And it's like, you don't want to, we can't wash our hands of stuff like this. Like, yes, did you or me make it happen? No. But do all of our collective practices as humans cause this? Yeah, they do. And can't ignore it.
And for those of you who don't know, what happens is they're called dinoflagellates. Mm-hmm. These dinoflagellates, what they do is they produce a neurotoxin. So these fish, like you talked about, these benthic fish, crustaceans, invertebrates, they're not fast moving. They're not built for going out into the middle of the ocean or traveling 100 miles in the course of 24 hours. So they're stuck there. So they're exposed to these neurotoxins. They die. As they die, now we're going back to those anoxic situations where you've got these organisms, which we call aerobic chemoorganotrophs, and they start sucking the oxygen out of that water while they're consuming all this dead stuff. And then the things that weren't killed by the toxins are eventually killed by the lack of oxygen. And it's just a snowballing process. And it all, like you said, it all comes down to how do we manage the water or manage our ecosystems, our land-based ecosystems that are near water to prevent these things from happening. And that it's expensive, but it's necessary.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, that's always the thing is it's not cheap, but look at how much more expensive it is to ignore it. Like if we were able to I think humans in general are kind of bad at that, like putting perspective on like, oh, well, we don't want to spend the money now. It's like, well, I guarantee you're going to spend it at some point. Now you can choose whether you want to spend that in cleanup and mitigation efforts or prevention. And it's like, it makes a lot more sense to spend it on prevention, because I'm sure if you looked at the numbers game of that, it's much cheaper to prevent instead of fix. So
yeah, absolutely. I agree. Well, you're not going to believe this, but we're coming up on an hour, and I
Oh,
promise
geez.
you, but we were talking. I'm like, you're like, how long? I'm like, oh, it'll be about an hour. So I want to be respectful of your time
I
because,
mean, I can keep talking. It's up to you. Totally up to you.
well, no, I just, what I want to do is at some point, I'd really love to do a part 2 to this, because
sure.
I am sure that you've got, first of all, I've got like 75 more questions I could ask. And I know you've got a whole lot more that you could talk about, but especially if you get this grant and you're able to go back into that river system, the Smith River system, I would love to have you come back and talk about that, as well as some of the other freshwater ecosystems that you've seen in other countries, because I think that would be really cool as well. Now, is there a place where people can see some of your work, like things that you've done? I mean, you keep talking about all these awesome areas you've explored. Like, where do they go?
Yeah, so I do post little snippets of things on my Facebook and on my Instagram. Instagram is probably the main place that I post stuff, just because it's more photo and video friendly than anything else. But I do regularly write my articles up when I go to fun freshwater places and publish them in Amazonas. So there are, I think I've got a Pacific Northwest river snorkeling article in there. I've got the Gobi article in there. Got a story about this cool little darter from Tennessee called the snail darter that got delisted from the Endangered Species Act a couple years back, entirely because of the efforts of people breeding them in captivity. So yeah, I mean, I write about this stuff pretty regularly and do have it in Amazonas. So if you don't have a subscription to Amazonas, consider it.
Girl, this is so. I tell people all the time, this is no joke. Amazonas is I don't care what the subject matter is. The quality of this publication is unrivaled. It blends insane photography with expert writers who bring this information to a level that beginners and intermediates can understand, but still have plenty in here for like the most advanced fish keeper, all accessible. You absolutely should. This is like a number one. If you're into fish, Amazonas is absolutely a magazine you should be subscribed to. It is absolutely phenomenal. So
it's a good one.
Your Instagram account, tell everybody where they can find you to follow you there.
Yeah, so my Instagram is noblue.nogreen. And that is inspired by a quote from my favorite lady. Her name's Dr. Sylvia Earle. She's probably the most well-known oceanographer maybe in the world right now. She's 89 years old. I met her when I was 9, and I can confidently say that she is definitely one of the reasons I do what I do today. And one of her quotes is, "No ocean, no life, no blue, no green." So yeah, we need both sides of everything. So yeah.
So I'll make sure that John puts all of your information down there, the Amazonas information, your information there.
Yeah, we've got an Amazonas, obviously, an Amazonas Instagram as well. I think it's just Amazonas Magazine. Amazonas Magazine, or Mag, I think it is on there. So yeah, definitely check us out on there. We try to post regular stuff as well as covering things that are going on in the pet trade, because there are constant legislative walls that we're up against with changes in what people think we should and should not be keeping in our aquariums. So it's always important to stay informed about those things, and if there are any opportunities for public comment to make your voice heard, then take those chances, because it's definitely best to have your voice heard before than after.
Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you for being here, and reach out to me after this at some point. We'll talk about the gobies some more, because
I'm gonna go smoke your gobies.
It sounds like you need more gobies in your life. So,
I do. I mean, who doesn't?
Thank you again for being here. Hang on for a couple seconds after we shut it off, and we'll roll it up, kind of button up. But everybody, thanks for being here as always. Hope you enjoyed it. If you want a part 2, leave that down in the comments section below. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week.
And pick up your magazines.